The wonderful world of Indian music is also a world full of mysteries, riddles, complex relationships, one that the outsider is perhaps curious about and the insider is grappling with. We have with us today the award-winning author, Namita Devidayal, who, through her wonderful book, The Music Room, gave us a little insight into this mysterious world. Namita, wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
You know, for a lot of us, when we start learning music, the beginnings are always a bit, you're a bit unsure, and sometimes you're bored, and sometimes you're excited. So what was it like for you?
Well, I really went in as a very reluctant student. I was pretty much dragged there by my mother. And, in the beginning, I think I did it out of force. But then clearly something in that music, or perhaps my teacher's absolute love, drew me in, and at some point there was no turning back, and I'm still very much in that world, even though I don't really train anymore. And having said that, I really wish that more children would have access to that space, because I think it's life-altering, not just musically, but at many levels.
The idea of the music room, when I read it, to me it works at many levels. It's also the physical space, of course. It's kind of your sanctum when you're going in for a class. But also it works metaphorically in many ways, the music room, and how it really affected so many aspects of your life. So how did that journey happen?
When I started writing the book, you know how you have to have a title to the document on your computer?
Right.
And this is the instinctive title that came out of me. And so I think it kind of encapsulated everything that I was trying to do in this book, which is, for one, to talk about this space, the room in which my lessons started and continued for years, but also to talk about that space which became like an alternate parallel space in my world, in my life, where things that were really different and magical and quaint and wonderful and spiritual were taking place. And of course, while it was happening as a child, I was really not aware or cognizant of what was taking place there. But later, I found myself being able to recreate that so vividly and beautifully, with all the emotion that was going on at the time, the mixed emotion, and the beauty, that I think that's what the music room really represents. It's a space that is very sacred to me.
I think what also happens along the way is your relationship with your teacher. And that is so crucial, that's so central in how it evolves you and your musicality. Whether you decide to become a performer or a singer, I think to me is probably part two to the whole thing.
Very much part two.
And your protagonist in the book, if I can refer to her as that, Doordarshan, tell us a little bit about how this beautiful relationship, how it happened.
It's one of those things that you can't quite explain, because it's Doordarshan is pretty much on every level the antithesis of who I am. If I'm a fidgety little restless person, she's a serene, quiet, Tehrav wali person. If I've just sort of been a dilettante on most things, she's been singularly committed to her art and her spirituality. And I used to exasperate her, and yet there was so much unconditional love in her towards me. It was almost more than that of a grandmother. And what she gave me was her art. So it was a relationship that developed because she believed in something that was inside me. She thought that I had the talent to be able to become her, kind of, carry her legacy on. And it's really hard, as I said, to explain it, because I still get drawn to her, and I still go and spend time with her, and it's not often about music. It's just to sort of sit at her feet and hear her stories, and she'll always have an insight to offer. I think because she's had such a potent and concentrated life that's filled with music, I think it alters one and gives one a certain kind of depth that is quite rare in our world. There's no superfluous things happening over there. So whatever she says, and she's quite worldly in her own way, will have some kind of resonance which stays with me.
I often wonder to be able to engage with your own art, with your own creative spaces, with your own creative expression. How important is it to really be so involved in everything that you do?
You know, that's what it is. So basically, when I say that every child should have access to some kind of musical experience or training in some depth, it's not because they have to go out there and become a virtuoso and perform and sort of, it's really because that discipline will inform everything that they do on some level, aesthetically, as well as that commitment that you get and are forced to get, really, because that's the nature of this kind of, music and many of our performing arts. So for example, Dhondutai, when she would make chai, she would say, "Main jod raag bana rahi hu," because she would actually mix two different teas and make it in a very specific way with a lot of love, like a connoisseur, because her life was that of a connoisseur when it came to anything that she did, her khana pina, her dress. There was just always an aesthetic sensibility that was above a certain mark, and so it does work that way. I mean, I think that everything is interconnected, and so when you participate in any kind of art with some depth, it's going to pretty much change the way you approach the rest of your life. So I feel like, when we talk about music as an extracurricular, it's kind of misguided, or any art as an extracurricular, which is the way a school would look at it, because it has to form part of your core curriculum, your core being, actually.
Right, it's very misplaced and underrated and therefore marginalized. Totally agree with you on that. But also, speaking of the woman that she was,
yes,
I find the contrast is just so amazing between her and Kesarbai, her, the pillar of Jaipur Gharana, the absolutely astounding performer that she was, Kesarbai was, and Dhondutai's richness and her music. And I find it such an interesting contrast of the kinds of women who have who have celebrated the stage, who have celebrated music. I think to me it's also an issue of how performance and gender can be interpreted in so many ways.
I think one of the most interesting things that happened very inadvertently in this book was my interpretation of Kesarbai as an artist, because she really straddled these two worlds of where she was absolutely celebrated as an artist, but really looked down upon as a, in the householder world, because she came from a community which was the Devdasi community. And this kind of paradox existed for many years in India, and I think caused a lot of extraordinary pain, and yet also kind of kept the music and art alive. So sometimes when one hears of like a Brahmanical kind of co-opting of the music, where we say it's come from our sacred scriptures and all, it's really misplaced, because actually it's been through all kinds of spaces, the dark side, the good side, it's like sort of when you compare, it's almost like looking at blues and where you have midnight blues, which kind of works into morning gospel. And so that's the nature of this music. It's very syncretic. You have Muslim practitioners, Hindu practitioners who may not eat or drink in each other's homes, but they will perform together with such seamless magic that you think that is the most universal language. And so and then you have like someone like a Kesarbai interacting with someone like Dhondutai, where these two women would never otherwise have socially connected, in those days. But the music really brought them together and made them very close in some ways. And I think that's the kind of extraordinary paradox and kind of complexity of India, And I think music is truly the only language that brings everyone together without them even realizing it.
What do you think is happening to the performance world? I mean, of course, more and more women are getting out there and performing, sure. But in terms of identities, in terms of ownership, let's say,
I think that India is going through a slightly difficult phase where most of us are grappling with trying to be global citizens and, you know, trying to sort of participate in this larger Western space, whatever that means. You know, it's a very vague notion that is kind of perpetuated by media, television, and all kinds of things. And so there is a little less sort of confidence, self-confidence about expression. And I think that has crept into the performance space a little bit. And I'm sure it'll all sort of settle down and come back into a happy, you know, medium. Because I think India has a way of just moving into different things and then coming back to where, you know, it belongs. So, and it's all very fluid anyway. Even Indian classical music has never been static, you know, it's changed over the years. So I think that one has to just allow what is happening to happen. Having said that, I think there does need to be more intervention on the part of institutions like the government and corporate sponsorship and you know, cultural bodies, to make sure that this music is around us in the same way that a lot of countries in the West, in Europe, etc., have you know, made the symphonies and sort of Western classical music a big part of the mainstream culture, almost where it becomes a tourist attraction, and people will actually go to Austria or Italy or wherever to participate in a festival because it's hip. Right. You know, we need to bring back that sort of like value to the music rather than have it be marginalized. You know, you go to a concert in Bombay, for example, and the average age will be 70 and above, and that's very distressing. Because I am somebody who I think straddles many worlds and finds it very possible and quite enriching to be able to have you know, go to a Western, sort of be part of a Western world, as well as have this very wonderful anchoring tradition in my life.
We're going to be talking about the other worlds that you're straddling across, and also how I see you as an important link, you know, in terms of, say, Doordarshan and people like her, phenomenal people like her, and the rest of the world which is yearning for, you know, just wanting to know more about people like that. So we're going into a break and coming back to talk to Namita Devidayal. We're speaking to Namita Devidayal, the award-winning author of many books, an author of many books, but we're talking about the music room right now, Namita. I think one of the important things that the book has done is somehow it's brought a lot of people together. Do you see that as your strength, that you can understand both worlds?
I do, actually. It didn't happen very as a conscious effort at all. All I was trying to do was bring this rather arcane world of Indian classical music alive and make it accessible to a wider audience. That was my sort of very general purpose in writing it. I think many more things ended up happening, but I do feel very sad about the fact that we have kind of marginalized a lot of very beautiful and powerful and important aspects of our own, you know, cultural and heritage. I hate using those words because they sound really like I'm some, you know, looking for the good old days that never were. But actually, it's really like we have to look at ourselves as part of a much larger collective consciousness. You know, something that where we come from, something, and unless we embrace that in our lives, in our even in the way we dress, in the way, you know, language, we're losing a lot, and it's to our detriment. You know, I mean, it's our society is tending towards a slightly generic.
Sometimes it's a chalta hai kind of a, you know.
Yeah, and it's really sad.
Sort of a, what can I say, some adjustment, compromise kind of an
but
approach.
You know, the thing is that I look at it purely from a selfish point of view, and I'm like, this is actually something that will enhance us. And you know, you find that people, it'll happen at an older age where suddenly they'll start seeing, you know, you'll find people veering towards yoga or finding a spiritual guru after they've had their midlife crisis, or then starting to listen to Indian classical music. But it's like, by then, if it hasn't already been a part of who you were, and you know, something that you grew up with, where the sound was an ambient sound around you and just kind of entered your bloodstream really, then you're not going to have the same, you know, it won't have the same impact. And that is something which we all need to think about in our schools, even in programming, you know, in the old days, and not that old, I mean, like when I was growing up, they had classical music on radio every morning.
Right.
And I remember it would just play there, and sometimes you turn your nose up at it as a child,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't, but it's there.
You just have to allow for the osmosis. I mean, you have to have that.
It's really
yes,
important.
absolutely.
You know, I manipulatively play music early in the morning while my son's waking up,
Right.
just because I wanted to just be there. I want
Yeah.
him to sort of, you know, grow up one day and recognize a note when he hears it. And I mean that as a metaphor, not like literally at all.
But on the other hand, you know, you're also part of this absolutely impeccable lineage, you know. I mean, Aladia Khan Sahab, Kesar Bhai, Doordarshan. I mean, I think it, even for me, even if as I'm saying these names, I get goosebumps, you know. It's really so privileged to have been privy to that kind of a lineage, you know. And I think it's only fair you sing us something.
Sakhi Mohana Mohani Da Hari Sakhi Mohani Da Re Re Mohani Da.
What a beautiful voice, Namita. You obviously do practice and sing. And do you manage to make time for that still?
Not enough, and it's one of the greatest regrets of my life.
So tell us what else is keeping you so busy. I know Aftertaste happened, but tell us more about your, the recent book and.
Well, I work for the Times of India, so I'm a journalist, and I am now working on a third book. After the Music Room, I wrote a second book which raised a lot of eyebrows because it was so different from the Music Room. It was a naughty novel about a business family. And now I am going back to my first love and hoping to write a book which will be a kind of a musical journey. It will be a sort of a musical pilgrimage, and both a personal exploration and one where I look at the connect between music and spirituality. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's kind of like been working inside me and something that I'm very personally passionate about. So I am hoping, and I have no deadline, I'm just going to allow it to happen.
But I see that it's drawing you back into your world of music and spirituality, which you seem to feel very closely about.
Yeah.
Even you've mentioned that very often in your book as well, in the Music Room as well. I see that.
It's a very experiential thing, and it's something that I think it's like when you listen to a piece of music, even when it's something that's just wafting past you, something changes inside, even momentarily. And that is the moment that I'm trying to explore. Of course, through many different means and modes and different kinds of music. But it's something that is so powerful.
At a more general level, I mean, apart from your writing and your writing on music and your other journalistic writing, I'm also curious, in terms of what you think about writing on music in India. What do you think is happening, and has it changed, or has it changed for the better? Should we look forward to something?
I think that in India until recently, the writing on at least Indian classical music was unfortunately not very accessible. So it was either hagiographic, you know, where people tend to, that whole sycophantic culture of India would creep into the way we wrote about our great artists, rather than treating them as human beings who have a wonderful gift, you know, which is a very different exploration of an artist, and a more honest one, and one in which more people would be able to relate, I think. So you had that kind of writing, and then you had this very like sort of geeky writing, you know, which was really hard to digest or understand, which is a problem with a lot of academic writing. And I think that they really did a disservice to understanding something that is actually a very beautiful space. So it turned a lot of people away perhaps, but I see that that's changing, and there's, you have this kind of these phases that happen in India. So right now, for example, Sufi music has become a very fashionable thing, so there is a lot being written about it, but I think what's lacking is some depth, you know, and that can do a big disservice really. It remains at a very superficial level, and because of the whole nature of concerts and impresarios and audiences, it tends to kind of undermine the real, the real thing.
Right. I think the coolness factor is it's a bit overriding.
Really. So, and then the same problem in media. So I guess it's all like one big, slightly superficial rendering of things, and that is unfortunate really, because there's more scope to do more in-depth writing about music. Though at the end of the day, music is not something that can really be written about. It really has to be listened to and felt.
I see it also as a bit of a transitional phase, where people like you who've learned can also write about it. I would also like to ask you, what is the future of classical music in India?
I think there's a lot going on. I'm very positive about what's happening. I think that we have to be very wary all the time of looking at things in a short, myopic way, because there are sweeps of change that take place without us realizing it, and it's so I think that there is a lot of training happening, a lot of interest as well, not so much perhaps in the big cities, but certainly in smaller towns. You hear of young artists who are just fabulous, in Dharwad, Jaitir, Mebundi, and so many others in Calcutta. What I think kids need to be really wary of is this instant coffee thing, this Saregama experience, or whatever it's called, that television show where...
That's right, the reality show.
Yeah, in Indian music and in most beautiful art forms, there's this whole idea of manjana padta hai. You have to really kind of like go through the grind and then come out, and you essentially become a performing artist after a certain age. Until then, you really have to sort of just deal with the rigor of it. And unfortunately, that thing has kind of gone out of us. There's a hunger to be famous and to make it, and that impatience I think does sacrifice something in the music and also in people. It's more than, as I said, the actual art. It's also a certain restlessness which takes away from, and also I think our society has become very conscious of success and fame, and that can have a very frightening effect on art.
That was Namita being very honest and upfront and very articulate and beautiful in telling us about and sharing her views on music, on her book, The Music Room. It's a book that has won many awards. It's also the favorite of no less than Mick Jagger and Sonia Gandhi ji and many other wonderful people. We're really thankful to you, Namita, for coming here and sharing your ideas with us.